Hearst Castle, everyone. My name is Sharon. I'm going to be your guide on this little mini tour that we're doing today of the kitchen. So I'm going to take you in right now through this side entrance to the kitchen. There's another entrance that also connects closer to the dining room. We'll go through the side. So this part is the pantry area. This is where the preparations would take place for service into the dining room. You're looking at a surface called Monel. Monel is a nickel copper alloy. This is not stainless steel because, of course, Mr. Hearst wanted nothing but the best. He wrote to Miss Morgan, his architect, and he said he wanted this much more expensive surface. It was going to be much more expensive than anything else that was available at the time, but it was known for its highly anti-corrosive quality. This is the surface where the staff would prepare the food, take it into the dining room. This was a warming table. There are copper pipes that go underneath this area, so it would keep the food with running hot water. Hot water would run underneath, and it would keep the plates warm, so that when the staff were plating everything would stay nice and hot. Underneath the surface is some storage area. And we're going to look a little bit more around the kitchen, see what else there is. Over here is a refrigerator. There are 4 refrigerators that Mr. Hearst had, and it looks maybe like you might an ice box, but it is not an ice box. It's a refrigerator. And there's a logo right up here that says Frigidaire, and next to it is another logo of the brand that also made the cabinet, the housing for the Frigidaire refrigerator. Up above is a compressor. We'll go down this way, see another one of the refrigerators Mr. Hearst had, and he had a couple more that the staff used as well. Next to these 2 refrigerators is an area where some alcohol was housed. This particular section just shows a sampling of what was available. Perhaps this was just being set up ready for service in the dining room. Mr. Hearst did have a wine cellar that's located a little bit further away. That wine cellar holds about 10,000 bottles. So just a small sampling of what might be served at dinner or for cocktails in the evening. Some people think that Mr. Hearst was a teetotaler. He's kind of known for that reputation. He was not a teetotaler. Prohibition was going on here in the 1920s. Started in 1920, ended in 1933, but as a good host, Mr. Hearst was serving alcohol. A cabinet is right here that has the dinnerware that was used. This is a pattern called Old Willow. It is said to be not top fine china. Mr. Hearst liked to keep things simple here at the ranch, so he used this stoneware. Panning right along, you can see we've got some nice glassware. Again, fairly simple in its look. Some flatware. Cabinets full of all of these things that would be used. Can you see this right here? These are some interesting spoons that people ask about. They are used for taking bone marrow out of a bone. Lots of these, and we understand that bones with the marrow were actually served here at the castle. In the corner, a little cabinet, electric heater in there for dish towels to dry. They did have electricity here on the hilltop from the 1920s. From the very beginning, they had electricity. Miss Morgan, the architect, had someone put in a hydroelectric power plant, and then later on they had to purchase electricity from PG&E. I want to point out the thermos. Mr. Hearst's guests may have wanted to come in here and get something to drink, so we've got a little prop of iced tea and lemonade. Mr. Hearst did not provide room service here at the estate. He wanted his guests to get together and socialize in the refectory, take their meals together. But if you were thirsty, wanted a little snack, you could come down in here to the kitchen and ask the chef for something to eat. People ask me, did Mr. Hearst have any art in the kitchen? Because this place is known for its collection of art. So I like to think of these little faucets with the spigots as art, but they are contemporary to the early 1900s. These were done by a company called Crane and Company, later bought by American Standard. And then you see some tiles. This tile work was all designed by Julia Morgan. She sent her designs to a company in Berkeley, California called California Faience. California Faience ended up making about 100,000 tiles for the castle. This particular tile that we are looking at is an armorial design. A little saying at the top that says, "Without him nothing was made." It refers to a verse in the book of John. This particular tile is a copy or a design that was inspired by a Spanish armorial tile. A telephone right here in the kitchen. Mr. Hearst had about 100 telephones here in the house. He had his own 24-hour switchboard operator. This particular telephone is a little unique. This little plastic piece that screws on to the mouthpiece came out in the early 1900s. You see little red crosses on there. The Red Cross actually came out with that as a way of sanitizing your telephone mouthpiece. A little plastic piece would unscrew and you could put that in boiling water to sanitize it. They were concerned about that way back then. We have a little medicine cabinet right here, little first aid station. These are all little propped items that are items that would have been available back in those days. I'm going to take you back to the kitchen area right now. Right over here. I'm standing in front of a griddle. Small griddle. If you imagine Mr. Hearst had about 25 to 35 guests at a time, those guests could come to their meals for breakfast. Around 9 o'clock is when they'd start serving, but you didn't have to arrive at 9 o'clock sharp. You could come between anytime you wanted to, within a few hours. So you might sit down, butler would put out some juice and coffee for you to get started, you could socialize with your friends, and then you could order something to eat. So individual orders, that's why we've got a small little griddle. Breakfast also could include eggs. A little egg poacher, looks pretty similar to an egg poacher today. This little contraption here is a pan that's sitting on the stove with two little compartments with springs. These springs would be pressed down, the compartments would go into the hot water, and then they'd come back up just when the eggs were perfectly done. The stove itself has varying levels of heat on it. The chef would know exactly where to put whatever he was doing, whatever he was cooking, so he knew exactly where he liked to put things. The ovens, we've got several ovens right below the stove, and you see a roast beef in this section of the oven. This was a working ranch. Mr. Hearst had cattle, he had poultry, all kinds of poultry. And this roast beef just shows us that Mr. Hearst did like an occasional rare roast beef. It was perfectly aged, which they did right here on the premises. A grill for grilling meats, vegetables perhaps, and then a rotisserie. Mr. Hearst did prefer poultry over beef. His favorite meal was said to be pressed duck. And they did have all kinds of poultry that they would grow here or that they would raise here on the premises. Right over here is a baking station. Not only was this a working ranch with cattle and poultry, they also had orchards full of fruit, apples, peaches, pears, plums, nectarines. So pies were a real favorite dessert. This is a marble section of the surface. Marble is great for making pastries. You roll out the pastry and it keeps it very tender. And then more baking area right here, cakes, pies, all kinds of fruit desserts were made. Underneath is a section where they would store flour and sugar. And if you are familiar with a KitchenAid, perhaps in your own kitchen, well, this is Mr. Hearst's version of a KitchenAid. It's called a Hobart machine. commercial version, quite large. A bowl with a whisk is what we see in here, but they would have paddles and whisks and shredders and slicers, other bowls up here on top as well. Lots of accessories. And you can probably see the logo right there, the Hobart machine. This is one of my favorite things right here. This whole shelf area reminds me of a page out of Martha Stewart Living. That is a collection of Jello molds, or back in those days they would have aspic, gelatin. It was said in the early 1900s, because of the Depression era, in order to keep foods better, they might coat them with gelatin. So you coat all kinds of things, meats, bits of poultry, bits of pork. So that was very popular because people who wanted to preserve things would use the gelatin, but later on it also became kind of a decorative way to serve food as well. Right back here is a giant stock pot. If you've ever made gravy at Thanksgiving, you might be familiar with a tiny little pitcher that holds broth. And in order to get the fat off of the broth, you might have a little spigot at the bottom of the pitcher. You pour the broth out the bottom and the fat stays at the top. Well, that's the same idea. Vegetables and meats were boiled in here, stock was made. And then if you wanted to just get the broth out, you go down to the spigot area and turn the little spigot to get just the broth. Next to the stock pot is a pressure cooker. If you have an Instant Pot or a pressure cooker, then you're familiar with what this contraption does. This is a double pressure cooker. We've got two wheels. These seal in, the wheels would be tightened. It seals in the steam, and whatever is in there cooks at a really high pressure and cooks very quickly. The staff made a lot of jams out of those fruits from the orchards, so this was probably used for that, as well as other foods. This is a proofing box. They made a lot of breads for breakfast as well as other meals. Breads would be formed into loaves, rolls, or cinnamon rolls, for example, put into the proofing box, which would keep those bread goods at a particular temperature, and they would rise nicely. Next to the proofing box is an electric oven. You've got 3 different ovens right here, but it was very controlled heat, so that these ovens would bake the bread perfectly. We're getting a picture of the logo down there. So I want to talk about the break room. Mr. Hearst did have a small staff on a regular basis, between maybe 9 or 10 people on a regular basis. There was a head chef, a pastry chef, there were maids, there was a butler who would be in charge of serving the food. Back here in the break room, they had their own separate dining room, so they might just come in here to have a cup of coffee or take a break. But there are some actual uniforms that the staff members wore. They all wore white except for the butler, who would wear a black suit. More storage space also here in the pantry. Right over here is the buffalo machine. It's a grinder, a meat grinder. A lot of people ask me about this machine. And over on this side of the room is a butter cutter. Can you see the butter cutter? They take a big block of butter, put it into this machine, and then you use the handle to turn it. The butter would move into the sliced area and then slice up the butter into smaller pieces. This is where the staff could spend their time. It was the Depression era. It was taking place in the 1920s. It was said that the staff who worked here felt fortunate to have jobs. Mr. Hearst treated them quite well. They were said to eat the same food that the guests ate. They had their own refrigerator just so that a pie didn't go missing, something like that, that was necessary for whatever meal was being served. So they would eat the same food. One person who worked here, his name was Byron Hatchett, said that he and his buddies started working, and after a couple of years, he said they had to tie each other's shoes because when they were looking down, they couldn't see their own. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this little tour of the kitchen. I really hope I get to show it to you soon in real life. That would be really great.